We'd like to thank the following sponsors for helping provide this video.
My name is John Benz. I'm the Vice President of Agile New England. I wanted to just drop a little note in here. I first learned about Agile from this guy. And somebody said, you really ought to go to this meeting. It's called the Nashua Scrum Club. And when it started out, there was about 20 people, and by the time Bob finished up, there was like 100 people in that meeting. We met every month, and I learned a lot starting there about Agile. So thank you very much.
So first, thank you everybody for coming. And what I want to say at the outset is that this presentation isn't for me. I actually have a copy of the slides, and I can look at them anytime I want. So the presentation is for you. The second thing, by way of introduction, I want to introduce myself in a funny way by telling you my career goal. And so my career goal is that at work, people experience joy, self-expression, partnership, and accomplishment. And so that's been my career goal since 1996. I took a course and you had to sort of say who you were going to be. And so how I got involved with Agile is because of that. And I didn't see a whole lot of joy, self-expression, partnership, and accomplishment going on at work. Maybe some accomplishment, but the rest of the stuff, not so much. And my first experience with an Agile project was like, wow, this is awesome. I want to do more of this stuff. So now, every now and again, when I mention that career goal to a manager, when I go to work somewhere, a CIO that I work for said, that's really great stuff. What's your real goal, though? But tell me for real. They said, no, it's that. If I get to do that, then I'm a happy guy. So I work for Eliasson. Eliasson's one of the sponsors here tonight, and so I do a variety of things with different clients. What I suggest tonight, now I don't know how many of you have been trained in using a pencil. I seem to have lost the skill, but so tonight, I'm going to ask you some questions, and what I would say is it tends to go better if you write them down, if you type them or something, than if you just do them in your head. Because if you write them down, that act of kind of committing it changes the modality, and you just kind of think about it a little bit better. So if you have a pencil and you don't stick it in your eye by accident or something like that, you're welcome to use it. So how did I come to this talk? So one of the things that I've noticed is that there's this really strange relationship in many organizations, and maybe not yours. So if this doesn't appeal to you, if this doesn't apply to you, don't worry about it. We're just talking about the organizations for which it does. Where there's this really strange division between people who are in the IT organization and people who are in the, and I'm going to use the phrase that I used before, and then we'll talk about why it's a challenging phrase, the business. And a perfect example came to me. I was working with a client, and there was a guy who was in the IT organization. And so all of us would correspond openly about certain issues that come up and things that we had to resolve. And this guy basically had a very similar job, but he moved into the business. And I started having an open conversation, and somebody came up and said, he's in the business. We can't talk with him about stuff like that. I understand Agile's open, but we got to be more quiet. I'm like, what is that about? And then another thing that I noticed was I was in one organization where the technical folks would go to extreme lengths to learn business material. So specifically, they would take these arduous tests to learn about financial services information that took 3 years of studying. And then they'd go, well, what do you think? Do you think we could get the business people to listen to what Agile's about for 45 minutes? Do you think they could spare the time? And I'm listening and going, this is really weird. What is this? How come this is happening? So I started to poke into this question of why is there this artificial division? What's happened that it goes that way? And so that's the purpose of the presentation tonight, is to start talking about some of the things that I've seen and some of the things that I think that you have to do to deliberately intrude on it. Because it's almost like it's a natural outcome of the way that we refer to each other, the language that we use, the roles that we adopt. It's almost like we're puppets and we're just kind of being dangled around by these things that have control of us. And until you can become conscious of the thing that has control of you, you don't really have any power over it. So I'm hoping by distinguishing these things and making them visible to you, then you can begin to see them, and then maybe in your organization you can start to do something about it. So first, why is it important to align on measurements of success? Should IT be run like an independent provider of technology services within a company? Is that a model that really makes sense to do? How do words shape how you think and behave? who is the business? So that was, I don't know how many of you saw the little tiny tag at the bottom of the description of this thing. That's one of the things we're going to talk about, like who is the business that we're talking about? And why is the most important thing your value stream often unmanaged? Like you manage your departments, but you don't actually manage the delivery of value. There's nobody who owns your value stream. And these are things that I think if you start to tackle, can start to bridge that gap between this artificial gap that's come up. So if you can take a minute right now and just write down how your group measures success. And I'm being deliberately ambiguous about what I mean by your group. So just take a couple minutes and just write down some stuff. How do you measure success? How do you know you're good? Like what does good look like? If you're good, what do you measure? Like is it on time or low defect rate or I make a lot of money or happy customers? What are the metrics that you guys look at in order to be able to understand goodness? And this is, by the way, going to be a feed into another exercise that we're going to do. So this will, for now, after you look at them, we're going to step aside and not look back at them, but we will in a few minutes. So it's not like I forgot the punchline. So let's start with a company. So what's a company? A company is a bunch of people who get together in order to be able to try to achieve some kind of purpose. And if you're lucky, everybody has a pretty clear view of what that purpose is. And they're all aligned on those goals. And they're all kind of marching in the direction of those goals. Now, usually a company isn't quite like that. Some companies are giant and they're flat. But for the most part with a company, at some point you go, well, I actually have to have departments because it's very difficult for me to be able to manage effectively like 10,000 people. So I got to somehow split those up into some kind of business units or functional groups or something. And a common way that they get split up is they get split up into functional specialties. So marketing, administration, operations, sales, and information technology. So you would think, well, of course, these groups, the goals are still really exactly the same goals as they were before. We've just now organized them according to departments. But those departments are clearly going to have the same goals, right? No, they don't. And that's the problem. So here's what happens. And here's IT Mart. I get an IT department going, and I read a book. And the book says, it's awesome to have a mission and a vision and goals for your department. I go, great. I know how to do that. Let's get everybody together. We're going to write a vision statement. We're going to publish it. We're going to send it around. And here's who IT is. We do this bunch of stuff. So we deliver world-class IT services supporting the success of our business. Our projects are on time, on budget, meeting all requirements, all this other stuff. This probably looks like, how many of you have one of these things or have been in a company that had one of those things? Okay, so at least two. Take a moment and reflect on what's missing in that. And what do you think of those goals? Are they good goals? Are they awful goals? And what do you think is missing? So I'll go back so you get to see IT Mart's goals. So what's missing?
Company level focus.
Company level focus. Yep.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Just company level focus. Unless you are a cloud provider, and in that case, that could be the general company.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so there are some technology companies for whom that's what they do, and that's a perfect set of goals. Yep.
People are delivering internally, so their customer becomes not the company's customer, but an internal customer. And so their vision and goals are set for that delivery rather than the organization's.
Right. Now, so the challenge of that is that you start optimizing for whatever those goals are. And for those of you who ever looked at systems thinking, just even in a rudimentary way, your whole company is supposed to deliver value. And if some silo starts optimizing like crazy, what they can do is they can actually de-optimize the delivery of the value from the whole. And so that's one of the challenges you have is if they have slightly different missions, what goes on. So here's an example of something that I had happen in an actual company. So the CEO that we worked for, he took a look at his goals, and he was red on almost every single aspect of his goals. And he looked, and all the people that were his directs had mostly greens. And so the question is, how can everybody have green as their scorecard if the CEO is failing? What does that possibly mean? How could that be true? So, and in this case, if you look at these, right, so the, little stick person on the left, responsible for call center. So call center, average speed of answer. You got to answer the call quick. So that's like really important. Cost per call. Man, it gets expensive if you have long calls. So we got to make sure that those go down. And account conversions. If somebody calls up and they have a question, I want to make sure that they buy a product from us. That's a good thing. And time to fill open positions. Those call centers have a lot of turnover. So there is nothing inherently wrong with any of those goals On the technical side over there's nothing wrong with systems availability. Who doesn't want systems availability, right? I mean, your customers want your systems to be available. But what happens is now is that as you start looking at these measures, and the way that a lot of people view these is these are kind of like proxies for the real measures. They're not the real measures, but they're kind of proxies for it. So now let's talk about this. So if I'm an IT department and I have different measurements, like I'm considering myself almost like a separate entity. I've defined myself as a separate internal company. I say I'm a provider of services. How does that compare to an actual provider of services, like what a real company would do? So SupplyCo is a company that supplies call center automation software. So what they do is they help managers of call centers do a better job managing their call centers. They give them reports and a whole bunch of stuff. So SupplyCo has companies, Home Medical, Antrim University, and Big Travel, who are all their customers. But how much are really the shared goals between SupplyCo and Big Travel? Little. So what might a shared goal be? Why would they, like, what kind of shared goal would SupplyCo? I provide software to help manage cost centers, and Big Travel's a big web-based travel company. What might the shared goals be that they would have? Yep. Yeah, customer success. So like they, for example, would want to have that their customers who use their software do a better job managing their call centers. Or if they need reports in order to be able to understand their staffing levels and how to do a better job staffing, they want their software to be able to do that. They can't possibly have insight into all of Big Travel's goals, nor can they be particularly useful with the rest of Big Travel because they got like 5,000 customers. They can't possibly know every single customer and every single goal for every single customer, nor are they in a position with their expertise to really be able to make a difference with it. Now let's go back to IT Mart and see what happens in that circumstance. So here, I'm working with different business lines, but the truth is, now how many of you have had the experience, you're sitting in a product discovery or product planning session, and it becomes very difficult for you to tell the difference between the technical person and the product owner? How many of you have seen that like your technical people eventually get, their understanding of what they provide to their customers is so strong that it's almost difficult to tell? Has anybody seen that? Yes, it's rare. It's a fairly evolved state, but at a certain point, because you're part of the company, you sit and you watch users go through prototypes, and you maybe go on customer visits, and or if they're internal customers, you get a chance to if actual people using your software to do stuff, you watch them do it, and you get a chance to find out that they do a good job with it or they do a bad job with it. So you're not really independent. You actually begin, if you're doing your work well, you begin to understand better and better and better what it is that the business groups that you support do, or the external customers that you support do, and you can now start to actually recommend how to improve things. I've been in places where a technical person will say, well, hey, we could do it that way, but that feels really inconsistent with the rest of our user experience. I don't think that would really make sense to us. Now, they may be a back-end Java developer, but they know the code. They've been through this stuff year after year after year. And so if you treat IT Mart like they're the separate organization, what you're really not taking advantage of is how much these people really know. And so this division, I don't think, is a particularly valuable one. Now, back to the measurement thing. So you don't have the same goals that I have, but things like our technology roadmap are important. So you see that there's this bit of distance that gets introduced because people are accountable for different things. One of the complaints that I've heard in many organizations, from IT organizations, is that they don't get a seat at the table with when business planning is going on. How many of you have been present to that complaint? Okay, so this isn't like just the weird groups that I've been hanging out with. So the reason, in part, I assert you don't have a seat at the table is that you're actually committed to a different thing. It's not a bad thing, but you're committed to a different thing. So you're not committed to sales, you're not committed to our students having the best experience and acing all their classes, or whatever that stuff is that the product owner is committed to is a different thing than you're committed to. So why would they say, come on down, participate with us, and let's do the road mapping together? Because what you do is actually different. And you've declared it to be different. And not only that, some places it gets even worse, which is give us the specs and we'll build it. Now that starts to really dissolve on Agile teams. But it's like, you send us garbage, we'll build garbage. It's your problem. We have no accountability for the thing that comes done. So the other thing is we're living on top of years and years and years of how organizations have worked dysfunctionally together, primarily in a waterfall thing, which is, you gave me a spec, I wrote the thing to the spec. If you don't like it, that's your problem. You should have written a better spec. So we're also working on top of history. It's not like we just suddenly we're all like fresh little flowers that, getting the water and the sunshine because we've done Agile. We have a history with a lot of these people, and if we're trying to build a more trust-filled relationship with them, there's work that we got to do in order to be able to bridge that gap. So I'm going to step back for a second and talk about a distinction that Jeff Patton uses. Jeff Patton, the story map guy, has a wonderful way of being able to describe. So I make use of it in measurement. He doesn't specifically do it in measurement, but, well, he does. So output, outcome, and impact. So imagine that you have a starting state. And in your starting state, you have either an issue or an opportunity. So let's go back to our call center example. The call center, somebody says, your reports aren't so good because under the following circumstances, I can't properly staff. I don't know who to bring on at the right time because it doesn't handle this weird condition. And if your software did that, that would be better. So you have some sort of frowny face. That's the thing where there's a market opportunity where you say, if I were to do something, it would be better, and they'd be more likely to buy our product. So then I have a light bulb moment. I say, oh, there's these awesome ideas. I have features that I could build, new capabilities I could put in. I can't build all of it, so I build a little bit of it. And the thing that I build is output. So output is the stuff, right? Is this stuff valuable? Only if it ships and it achieves the goal that the person had. So you could build stuff that never ships. That's happened a lot. You can build stuff that ships and people use it and it doesn't actually do what it was supposed to do. And you can build stuff that people use but you don't make any money. So they love it but you don't make any money at it. So output, the stuff that you build, really isn't inherently valuable all by itself. Somebody actually has to do something with it. So what Jeff talks about is he talks about outcome. So an output would be, I built a feature that I now have a better report for my call center manager to do a better job staffing. That would be output. Outcome is somebody now uses the report and they do a better job. They can schedule people better so the costs go down and they have the right people on the phone when the customers call instead of the wrong people on the phone. Instead of people waiting, they now get their calls answered and get their questions answered, so they're happy about that. Impact is the difference that it makes for you and your business. And this is what I call a Thanksgiving dinner table metric. So impact is something that you could talk about with your family and say, yes, we have happier customers. Yes, we made money. Yes, we introduced a new product and got into a market that we weren't in. Yes, we entered a new market segment with the product that we already have. So impact is the difference that you hope it makes for your business as a result of doing this thing. So I have, let's use another example. I have a website and I want to have new customer self-service features. And I want to do that for a few reasons. What I'm hoping is I get fewer calls to the call center and it becomes easier for the customer because frankly, these days I'd rather do self-service if at all possible. Like I don't find any thrill of calling a call center and bouncing around and messing around with the menus. So I think I'm going to get those two things out of it. So those are the outcomes I hope to get. The output is the new features. And then from there, I'm hoping I get lower cost center calls and higher profitability. And I'm also hoping that I get greater customer satisfaction. So when you're inside of an organization and you're sitting inside of the organization, in other words, you're part of the organization, then I think what's important is you can start to move towards more shared goals. Now, you're not going to have entirely shared goals, right? For example, a lot of the accountability for security for your software is going to reside with technical people. And that's not going to be like maybe that's desired at the corporate level, but some of the things are going to necessarily be technical only goals. That's the only people who focus on those things. But if you're in an organization and your goals are like that, how do you start moving them more like that? And how do you start moving them over? Because my assertion is that once you start to do that, you build a level of trust that enables the conversation across the groups to be more productive because now you're committed to the same thing as opposed to being committed to different things. And that your ability to request a seat at the table is obvious. You should be at the table because you're committed to the same thing. So in the company that I worked in, once the CEO noticed this division of goals, so the CEO, the CIO, and all of their directs, in that particular time I was working for the CIO, we all now had the same goals. And I don't mean kind of the same goals. They were literally worded exactly the same. The measurements were exactly the same. Because the mischief happens when you have kind of goals. Like, well, you know, I want our customers to be net promoters. And I want my customers to say yes on a customer satisfaction survey. They kind of sound the same, but they're not the same. So we had identical goals. So for example, one of the things that we had was client green. And what client green meant was a whole lot of indicators that said, is my client relationship healthy? So these were like defects. So in this particular case, a customer would go to a doctor, and if they went to a doctor, sometimes the doctor would say, you have no insurance. But the person, in fact, would be insured. That was a customer green satisfier or major dissatisfier. So I was involved in discussions where we had a bunch of Six Sigma people who were trying to make the world better by trying to fix this problem of customers not having insurance, because not having insurance was really awful. I mean, you can't get much more awful than being ill, going to a doctor, and being told, sorry, you're going to have to pay, like, you know, this doesn't work. So we had attempts to try to solve this problem. And here's how the conversation went. Well, you know, I understand that on the business side, you guys have this center for being able to do problem tracking. But I don't really do problem tracking using that system. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to like copy the problem over into our system, because we use another tracking system. And frankly, we got like, I don't know, this like 700 defects we're in the middle of working on. So it's, you know, it might be a couple of weeks before we even if it's a high priority, we won't even know what's going on. And then we got to decide which release it's going to go into, and our releases take a really long time. Meanwhile, like the customers are like furious. But we had awesome, terrific, marvelous reasons for why we were awful. We were just like we could really demonstrate clearly why we were like, no, we got our process. So what we had done was we optimized inside of inside of a silo. And we were doing exactly what we thought we had to do, and we de-optimized the rest of the process, and we had awful customer service. So the CEO said, this is the way it is. All of your goals are the same. And of course, the first thing is, well, I'm in IT. How can I be accountable for their goals? Don't they drive everything? Now, if you just consider for a moment, how many business activities work today without a computer? Like close to zero, right? I mean, you can't do anything without a piece of software. So these business people have been dependent on us. If you're in IT, if you're not in IT, then you haven't been. They've been dependent on us for decades to do our job well. They can't be successful. They can't make money at all without the development organization developing code in order to be able to implement their product vision. Yet, the first twitches that everybody was going through, and I completely understand why they were going through that, the first twitches they went through is, how can I possibly be accountable for client green? Like, how could I be accountable for clients being green? I can't imagine how I could do that. And the answer was, might be good to try to find out, because your bonus is tied to it. Now, but it wasn't, so what I want to say is, it's not just you had a bunch of stupid people, and what you need to do is like dangle a bunch of money in front of them or threaten with taking the money away. So that wasn't really what happened. What happened is, once you start to understand what was really important to the business, it naturally caused you to start to align with how do I solve it. If what you've been hearing is uptime, on budget, that's the stuff that's really the most critical stuff to do. And you've heard that for speech after speech after speech, and year after year, and your bonus reviews are telling you if you do that stuff, you're really good. You can't hear when somebody goes, dropping insurance is terrible. It's like, well, it's going to violate our process. I'm going to like mess up. I mean, everybody told me I'm supposed to be focused on this other stuff, and we we our process for doing it. You can't make me change my process. And so once everybody had these clear objectives, and it was like really clear. So we had really, really good metrics people at that place. And it was very clear what these metrics meant. It wasn't confusing at all. You knew if this stuff wasn't happening, it was really bad. Like, we wanted these things to happen. So first suggestion, make sure that you have some of your key performance indicators that cascade down across the organization so that everybody has the same stuff. And again, the mischief is don't make them sort of similar, identical. They have to have the exact same means of calculation. They have to have the exact same success criteria, or else people will mess around with them. Now, it's okay if you have department level KPIs. I'm not saying that this suddenly replaces your entire scorecard. You may have some things that are appropriate for you to measure at the departmental level, and you should continue to do that. What I'm saying is share some of the stuff down. Okay, so now the try it now. Take a look at the ways that your organization measures success that you wrote down earlier. And just are they output, outcome, or impact based? And are they department focused or enterprise focused? So just take a look at the stuff that you currently, because I just said to you, how do you measure your success? What did you write down? And are they focused more on, we produce a lot of units, we produce a benefit, and are they for just your group, or are they more broadly across the enterprise? So who has an enterprise one that they'd like to share?
So the metric that we use, we're an internal service organization. So the metric is pulse signals for requests for more service. And since we're servicing across the enterprise, it's an enterprise level, and it's outcome based because we've had a positive impact, which generates more pulse signals. And if we're not getting more pulse signals, then we haven't had that impact.
Got it. Thank you. Anyone else who has one that they would consider that's like kind of outcome focused and enterprise wide? Yep.
I don't have a microphone, but adoption, just plain adoption of the product. You can measure that by building it into the product.
So for example, if you've put a new feature in, do people use the feature?
That's correct. That's correct. Exactly.
Great. So that's actually, so as we start to move and start to talking about what can you do at a team level, that's actually some of the stuff that you can start to do, is you can start to find out, are you actually making a difference with the software that you put together? So I don't know if any of you ever really thought of this, but one way of thinking about a user story is a hypothesis. Right? A user story is a hypothesis. You think if you build this thing, this bunch of value will come out of it. Now, maybe in some cases it's not a hypothesis, like if the government said, we will shut you down if you don't conform to this regulation, and you don't conform to the regulation, you get shut down. Maybe that wasn't so much a hypothesis. Maybe that one is true. But a lot of the features that you put into your software, the stories that you write, are really hypotheses. And the hypotheses have some sort of connection to, I'm expecting to have some outcome, and then eventually some overall benefit to the organization. The next thing, and this is just for you to take back with you, are what are 3 examples of goals that could be shared across your organization? So if you look at your broad organization, what things might you, and this is something that, if you're listening for this, it might have been something that you would have heard during like, here's our annual plan. But just what are some examples that you can think of that could be shared goals across your organization? So it could be, we entered a new market, we're more profitable. So take a couple minutes and just take a look at what those might be. Does anybody have one that they'd like to share with the group? Or be willing to? I mean, not like to. Yep.
Increase customer satisfaction.
Great. And do you have like a customer satisfaction way that you measure today?
No.
Right. So having that would be an up statistic for your group, and then having everybody aligned around it would actually be great. Got it. Thank you. Anybody else have one that they want to talk about? Yep.
So this is not IT based, but one of the things I'm doing on a volunteer basis is working with a group that's lobbying the state legislature, and a good measure is, did we get the legislation passed?
Absolutely. Yep. Legislation passed. If you're lobbying, legislation passed is a really good indicator of overall success, right? That's the goal. So now one of the questions I want to take it down to is, what about at the team level? And as I said earlier, completed user stories really aren't value. Value happens when the code shipped, the code's used, the user realizes the intended outcome, and the organization recognizes the intended impact to the organization. So normally, teams will measure things that are primarily focused on output. Am I on time? Am I on budget? Do I have good code quality? Do I have a lot of defects? How's my velocity doing? Am I getting better over a period of time? And so I'm not suggesting throwing those things out, but what I'm suggesting is to have this be an and. And if you look at the bottom of here, what I said was, for example, if you're somebody who's working on websites that you put features out that are supposed to take away calls from your call center, Does it actually do the job? And I think that that's really important as you start to think about, are we making a difference for the organization? And even if your bonus goals aren't attached to this, it still is a good thing to be able to know. So now, you mentioned earlier that you have software that you manage, you find out whether it's used or not. So used is one indication, but then the other one, you might have to do a little bit more work to dig out from the phone organization to find out, did they actually have a decrease in those kind of calls? So maybe people call to get a refund on an airline ticket because that's the only way to do it. When they go to the website, it's confusing. So the fact that they use your feature, but they still call a call center and say, help, I couldn't figure out the website, then so you need to have a balancing indicator to be able to do it. Another example I have up here, if you're expecting that when you do this thing, you'll have more conversion from shoppers. So instead of them being shoppers, now they're buyers, and you want to take a look at it. And this is the sort of stuff, I don't know if any of you have been in a presentation that Etsy does, but Etsy focuses an enormous amount on, if I build the thing, does it actually have the business impact? They have that built into almost every single feature that they put in, because that way they know whether or not they've delivered. So it's pretty cool. So I'm going to summarize these and just make sure if there are any questions, I get them. So the core ideas of this first section were to make sure that you align on impact and outcome-based KPIs across the organization. Same ones, not similar ones. It should have accountability for business outcomes. IT should have accountability for business outcomes. Tie performance goals to outcomes and impact not only output, because you can have a ton of output, but if you don't actually make a difference, who cares? And then you can also start small. So you may say, yeah, but I'm not the CEO, so I'm not going to have a chance to do this, and this isn't a place that I can make a difference. But you can start doing some things on teams. And there are actually teams now in organizations that I've peripherally connected to. And what they've started to do is they're calling them outcome-based teams. And they're starting to actually say, how do we measure business success in addition to measuring technical success? And if nobody looks at it except for the team, but it helps the team do a better job as they're grooming their backlog, and it has the team come up with better questions as their product owner is saying, here's the thing to do, I think it's a win. Now, if this starts to become more of a groundswell, and you have more teams that start to do that, I think what you're going to see is much tighter partnership, and the IT folks are going to get invited into the planning sessions, because now it's going to be like you're actually committed to the same thing I'm committed to. Part number one. So part number two, what are the downsides to the customer-supplier model? So if I work for Supply Co. and, too bad, big travel, they didn't figure it out. They had awesome call center software, but they did a lousy job selling travel, so they failed. So I don't go to them anymore because they're not around. But I have a whole bunch of other customers, and I can just go do work for some other people. One of the reasons why I think the internal, we're just an internal provider of IT services, and we're really kind of arm's length to the rest of the company, doesn't make any sense, is because if the company goes bankrupt, you go home. Right? Supply Co., they just go, well, we have 5,000 customers, we lost a big one, that's really terrible, we got to find another one. But if the business that you're part of, the overall big business that you're part of, goes bankrupt or has a significant business problem, it affects you. So I don't see any reason why a product specialist is any better than or any superior to the people who are in the development organization. Because frankly, if the whole system doesn't work together as a whole, you all go home, right? You don't get to stay. You don't get to say, our code was on time and on budget. Well, the rest of you guys go home. We're sticking around. Just keep paying us. It doesn't work that way, right? So I think that when you set up this model of, we're a customer of yours and you're the internal IT supplier, you set up something that's not true. Now, by the way, this has been a struggle for me for years. For years, I insisted that we call the people that we provide services to as IT our customers. So this is not easy won ground for me. This is sort of radical. So I'm if I was arguing with the me from 15 years ago, it would have been like a brawl, right? Because I used to want to call these folks customers. And I finally got it into my head that I was actually doing damage by what I'd done. But I had no idea. I was naive. So I've been poking around this problem for a little bit. So are we really just a fee-for-service provider, or are we an integral part of organization success if we're in a technical organization? And if you've been part of an Agile organization, I can't imagine that you would continue to think that we're just a cog in the wheel But you've experienced it. You've been on these teams. You really begin to feel like you're making a difference for these organizations. So why does it persist? So I'm going to assert that there are three things: language, social roles, and practices that cause the continued separation, and that these are actually important things that we don't pay much attention to. So the first is language makes a difference. Our world exists inside of words. There is no such thing as democracy. We invented it. There's no such thing as democracy. There's not like, a democracy gene that somebody has. You can't like find the democracy mineral. We invented it. But if somebody violates the idea of one person, one vote, we're like, what's going on here? That's not democratic. But democracy is an idea. It was an idea that was invented. And the thing about human beings is we build abstractions, and then we climb into those abstractions, and sometimes we forget we built them. And so we built a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of abstractions around business and IT and customer and supplier. And we built that stuff up. And that language that we built up, now we inhabit, and we forget that we built it up. It's extremely powerful. So do you use the phrase, the business in your organization? And if yes, what drawbacks do you see from using that phrase?
Well, it creates an us versus them situation.
Right, it's a lie. They're not the business. We're all a business because we all go home if the business doesn't work. And in theory, all of our salaries go up, and we hire more people, and we have a better work environment if we do well, right? So it's fundamentally just not true. How many people, by the way, do you use that expression? I forget how many. It was a fair number. Yeah, so it's fairly prevalent. Now I'm going to drive into something that's, I think, even more pernicious, which is roles. And roles are interesting. So I got a quote here, and I'm going to read at you, and I apologize for reading at you, but I think it's an extremely powerful quote. When you walk into a store to buy something, when you go to a restaurant, the bank, the post office, you may find yourself slipping into pre-established social roles. You become a customer and speak and act as such. And you may be treated by the salesperson or waiter who's also playing a role as a customer. A range of human conditioned patterns of behaviors comes into effect between two human beings that determines the nature of the interaction. Instead of human beings, conceptual mental images are interacting with each other. The more identified people are with their respective roles, the more inauthentic that they become. So try this. Notice if when you're in a store, so like I notice, like I go into drugstores, and I go into a drugstore and somebody goes, man, there's a really long wait. Or they don't like they're talking, right? And they're talking to each other. And they're not like coming to address me. Now I have no idea. They might be talking about a life or death situation, right? I mean, they might not be goofing around. They may have like a medical interaction that somebody's asking a question about, right? I have no idea. But I'm starting to like do this sort of thing and starting to get kind of grumpy about the whole thing. And when they come over, I reserve the right to be snippy. Would I be as snippy with my best friend or my boss or an actual customer, like an actual business customer? And the answer is no. And the reason why I reserve the right to be snippy is because I'm inhabiting a role that has default behaviors. I am a robot. There's no human being there. There's just a robot who's acting like I'm an outraged customer. So now we're using these words. We're using these words like customer, but not only just the words customer, we're inhabiting the mental model that they are our customer. And they get kind of used to being treated like royalty. So they start acting like royalty. How many of you have watched Downton Abbey? Is that like a thing or not a thing here? Anybody? Okay, so one at least knows of the existence of Downton Abbey. So years ago, there was like, before Downton Abbey, there was a sort of like lower budget version of it called Upstairs, Downstairs. And they did a retrospective on Upstairs, Downstairs where they interviewed the actors. And they were talking to the actors and they said, well, one of the things that was funny. So we weren't on camera. We were off camera. But if we were upstairs people, we expected to be treated better than the downstairs people. Now, if they're playing Othello and they're in the London stage, they would have been of equal stature. But because they were wearing like the downstairs clothes and they're kind of like used to being treated like, what can I bring you, my lady? They were just used to that stuff. And I assert that if you look at how we behave, if you're in IT, how we behave with the people that are in the business product lines that we support, it's often like that. Like, oh, we can't trouble those guys. We don't want to bother them, right? Like, we've got to get this all figured out before we go and talk to them because they might be upset. And they get used to that. That's how it's supposed to be. Like, I'd love to be in the royalty class, right? Wouldn't that be awesome, right? You know, like, there's all these people, and they shuffle around. They're like kind of afraid of me, and like, oh, and awesome, they're going to send me a customer satisfaction survey. And they get a red mark. Like, what kind of power is that, and how idiotic is it? I mean, how idiotic is it to have a customer satisfaction survey to send somebody who's on your Agile team with you to ask them whether or not they like what you're doing? Like a unidirectional survey to say like how awesome or not awesome you are. Is that like, that's ridiculous. But these are practices that continue. And these are all the things that keep this sort of ridiculous interaction between these people going. We're not human beings. We turn to robots. We go and we meet with each other because we just fall into default roles. So you don't want to be a robot because it's not a whole lot of fun. So this builds this divide where even how people listen in a room and whether they're willing to bring up an objection, all sorts of things change. So now I just want you to do a little bit of thinking about it for a moment. So if you're in this relationship, a supplier-customer relationship, what behaviors do you see? What might you see? So I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about this one, because I want you to dig into what it's actually like being you in your organization and what you actually experience, because this is not fake. This happens. What behaviors do you exhibit? In what ways do you defer? What ways do you hide problems? What kind of measurement systems do you put in place? How do you talk about them? How do they talk about you? By the way, I never said thank you. That was a really nice introduction. Thank you. I just saw you over there. I'm like, that was really gracious. Thank you. So who has an example of a behavior that happens because you inhabit these roles of whether you're the business or IT? Who sees something? Yep, back there.
But with the response from IT that, well, do it for you, we'll have to do it for everyone.
So you make up rules because you are, after all, a service bureau. And as a service bureau, you have to have rules about what your work intake process is. And if you violated your work intake process, then you might be in trouble, because everybody knows, like, if you show up at CVS and you just let somebody walk behind the counter and grab what drugs they want, it's not going to work, right? So you've established a boundary condition. So it's like a kind of a non-negotiable thing, and it's not related necessarily to the business goodness or badness of it. Got it. Who else has one? Yep.
Subject matter experts can become condescending. So when they're labeled as such, they suddenly take on this role of somewhat godlike. You know, I am the most knowledgeable. And as a result, they begin to look at all the others around them as much less knowledgeable, which is a really big assumption. Rather than listening even to the person who has the least amount of knowledge in the room, they may have the right idea at that moment in time. So it's really important for them to listen, but they tend not to.
Yeah, so you miss a lot when you inhabit roles. That's what you just said was incredibly valuable, because when you can't hear what another person has to contribute because your filter is set up. Yeah, I mean, so you don't have to read much into the wisdom of crowds to realize that collectively we actually are smarter than the individual. It's great, thank you. Yep, back there.
So contract negotiation over customer collaboration, maybe following a plan rather than maybe even tools and processes over individuals' interactions, basically reversing the Agile cluster.
So what you see is you actually see that that happens inside the organization. So because they're in these roles, they get to say, sorry, we're not going to operate your way, we got to operate our way, and our way is not that way. Got it. Thank you. Yep.
Sometimes you hear the customers catastrophizing issues and making everything a priority, and the supplier side will be like, yes, yes, yes to everything to give the customer everything they want. So there's a humbleness that winds up coming out on the supplier side, where they become yes people, and the customer's demands from catastrophizing and prioritizing everything as a priority.
Yeah, and that's a funny game, right? Yes, there's a project manager that I knew, and she said, what you have to do is you lie. She said, because otherwise you end up fighting for a really long time, and I don't want to fight for a really long time. So usually you just say yes, 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 and then later on, eventually you reach some happy medium, and they even forgot that you said yes. But if you get in that fight, then you're just going to like fight for hours, so I just say yes. But you know, that it can just go that way? And like, there's not like, so where are the actual human beings? Do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. They're all number one priority. Where's the human being there? Like you can't go, what are you doing? How could that possibly work? What reality are you from? But you can't ask those questions, right? Because you're the supplier.
Along that same line, I was in a situation where even though it was funny money, the IT budget came from the business, right? And so when you were making commitments, you played these games by, saying it would take longer or more money so that you could, maintain your staff, or you would, overcommit because you wanted to ensure that the money and the budget would be approved to get the project going. It was a constant adversarial situation.
Right. Well, it's not, and the whole thing about this is that there's nothing weird about it, right? Now, it's a revelation to notice it, but there's nothing actually strange about it. We set up systems that are really kind of defective systems, and then, like I say, we build our abstractions, and we inhabit them, and we forget we created them, and we miss the consequences of them. But that's a great example. Yeah, and another one is, I have technical things that I want to do, but I think that if I tell the product people that I want to do them, they'll say no. So what I'll do is I'll estimate this other thing higher. It's kind of like my sandbagging thing where I get to do what I think is important, and it's impossible for me to be open. So I'm just saying this is the environments we're working in. This is what we've created to work inside of, and I think it's insane. Yep.
Another result is general opacity. When I walk into a grocery store and I'm buying, vegetables, there's very little communication between me and the person at the register over why I want the vegetables. What am I going to do with them? And why are you providing me with these vegetables, and why couldn't I find kale? That discussion doesn't happen.
Yes. Yep. Right. So the opportunity that's represented by conversation. Well, and imagine being put in the role. Now consider the insanity of the role that we used to make people go through, where they had to write requirements documents. Like, how could they be asked to do that? Like, you're now omnipotent, and you have to understand the market and how to write all this stuff, and you have to be like a total genius and figure this stuff out, and we'll yell at you if you get it wrong. And if you come and ask us for anything later, all the things that are going wrong with the project, we're going to like sweep that under the carpet and give you a giant bill for this one feature that's like 3 lines of code in order to be able to cover the fact that we're in a budget overrun. And that stuff happens all over the place. And that's one of the reasons why these relationships are actually pretty lousy. So I think what we have to do is we have to damage that stuff. There's something that we have to do to it. And that's what I'm going to talk about in a minute. So, other ones, sorting out problems behind closed doors. Like, we can't let the business know that this thing is going south. So we're going to like keep the problem hidden as opposed to telling them, because we're in IT, and IT has to put on the best possible face for the organization. Developing strategies and plans in isolation. Everybody does this, right? The IT group goes off and they have their offsite and they do their plans, and the business groups go off and they develop their plans. And wait, isn't this like we're planning together? Now, I understand there's some stuff you have to do, like, yeah, we got to upgrade our Amazon thing because we're using the older kind of servers, and we got to use the newer kind of servers. And there's stuff that's probably not very interesting but remember, you're moving towards more shared goals. That's all I'm saying, is move towards more shared goals. And then what you want is just more venues where you can have more conversations. Customer satisfaction surveys, I think I've made enough fun of those. And then the other one I just mentioned, the internal funding without transparency. So the core idea is here. So this is to start having a dialogue, like a real, actual dialogue about what your behaviors are like, and start talking about them. This is hard work to do because this is embedded behavior. So I do Agile consulting, I go to companies and I coach, and I swear so often I turn automatically into an employee. I'm not an employee. They don't pay me to be an employee. And by magic, I'm starting to do like employee things. And it's like, whoa, who's got control of me? So this is not easy to break this stuff. But when you start to notice ridiculous things happening, just start to find a way of talking about them. So one of the things to do, the awesome thing is that Ron is videotaping this. So if you have a team, your whole team probably didn't show up tonight. So if you want, you can just like look at some parts of this tape and you can start talking about it together. And you can say, you know, I'm starting to notice some patterns where we really seem like we're not working well together. And maybe watch this thing, and then let's just talk and say, what stuff resonated with you as you watched this talk? Did you find anything kind of went click for you about how we're operating and places where we could possibly be more effective as a team if we actually started working together in a different way? The second thing is consciously adopt the language. So I was in one place. Oh, I forgot to mention. So Morris Heffernan, who's now a CIO of an insurance company down in Hartford, I was doing some coaching inside of his group, and he was the one who started me down this whole path of the language of the business. And then I kept sort of pulling myself into it and learning about roles. But so we would be in a meeting and somebody go, what would the business think? And then somebody go, oops, I just said it. Huh, I do that. But so even though we still struggled, the fact that we now took the struggle from being invisible and made it visible was actually powerful. It's a way to get started. So find words that work for you inside of your organization and try to make use of them. Adopt collaborative joint portfolio planning. So if you have a portfolio planning process where you're planning your roadmap and you're taking a look at your vision, do it together. If you're setting up a portfolio management process, I don't know, how many of you have a good portfolio management process where you have like a roadmap and like you're executing against a roadmap and you get together periodically, like quarterly or semi-annually? So have everybody there who has of consequence to the thing, because people collectively are smarter than just an individual, you know, like not having the technology people there. Because technology people aren't really technology people. They're people with a technology focus who are in the travel business, or people with a technology bent who are in the saving lives through curing cancer, right? That's really what you are. You're a person who has a job inside of an organization, and you are that too. You're not just a technology person. Eliminate the unidirectional customer satisfaction surveys. I would blow these up as soon as possible. Now, I will say, in some organizations, one of the things that the technology organizations might do is provision phones, right? So it's probably good to have it's probably perfectly fine to have a service satisfaction to say, when you ordered a phone, did it come on time? Does your phones work? If you have a problem with your phone. So I'm not saying entirely eliminate the mechanism of surveying. When you're talking about a product development team, agile teams, to be sending out a survey to the business folks who work on that team to ask them whether they love you or not, that's nuts. And we know how to fix, like, we know what to do, right? Retrospectives. Have lots of those. But also have retrospectives not only at the team level, but at the organization level, and start to notice your own dysfunction. And then watch your own behavior and see where you default to pre-established roles. Laugh, move on. You know, laugh, take action, move on, because you can't not, right? I mean, we all just will do this stuff all the time. But the question is, do you notice it, and do you like start turn back? Do you veer off of the course of robot back to being a person? Okay. So the last thing, and I get till 20 past, is that right? Okay, so I'm still doing okay. So this is a try it now. Who in your organization is responsible for the end-to-end of concept to cash? Does anybody have an answer? Most places the answer is nobody. What? Right, but everybody's a little abstract though. I mean, it's true, but there's a little bit of, so there is mischief underneath that, and I'll explain a little bit what the mischief is. There's a guy, Michael Hammer, and he has this great quote, so I'm going to read at you again. The work that creates results for customers is broken into pieces and scattered across numerous departments and units. In these companies, workers, managers, and departments focus on each of the steps that would lead to creating results for customers, yet no one focuses on all of the steps together as a unit. These companies suffer from a crisis of process. So can you imagine if somebody said, like, well, who's responsible for the shipping department? Kind of nobody. Well, what are their policies? I don't know. Nobody runs the shipping department. Now, I'm not talking about some really advanced self-organizing company. I just mean the shipping department has no manager. What would you think of that company? It's organized, right? Bad company, right? Like your QA group, there's no manager. There's nobody managing the finance department. So, but here's the paradox. The stuff that produces the most value for your company and from your customer is horizontal. It's not vertical. It's horizontal, it's not vertical. It's the sum of the pieces coming together. What customers care about when they work with you is, can I buy it? Does it do what it's supposed to do? If it breaks, will you help me so I get it back right? That's the stuff that customers care about. They care about these primary transactions for being able to deliver value. And we don't talk about that stuff. We actually have no idea who's responsible for the end-to-end. How many of you have a department that you're working with to try to get something to happen and their processes actually make your work much harder? I didn't see everybody's hand go up. So maybe some of them have a pretty good setup, or maybe by now you're kind of tired and you've been raising your hand. So I don't know that I have like a perfect algorithm for figuring out what you're thinking. So here's where I first got introduced to this. So years ago, lots of years ago, I don't know how many, I was responsible for a group, and what we did was we packaged software for delivery to desktops. This is when like software got delivered to desktops. Now it's all the web, but you used to do a lot of software delivery. And if you did a poor job doing software delivery, then you could blow stuff up. And we did. We actually blew up the better part of a call center across multiple sites. We blew them up. And that was the primary contact channel for the customer then, was to call call centers, and we blew it up by putting, and it turns out that this particular case, there were two files, and they had the same version number, but they weren't actually the same file. We didn't know. So what happened when we got together to do our kind of post-mortem, you know, you'd say, well, we must have all gotten together and pulled together. And well, no, we had the customer, in other words, the business unit head, on the phone. So what we did was try to figure out which one of us was blameless. Yeah, well, we really checked that package out. It was really great. Yep, we tested it out on 30 desktops. We did our normal pilot. Don't know what happened there. And so what we did was we all had like a good alibi. We had awesome alibis for why it was that the thing didn't work, but it didn't work, right? We blew up a lot of desktops. So what we did was, and this was very, so we were all functional silos, and they all had managers and staff, but nobody was actually responsible for owning the end-to-end. There was actually nobody focusing on what the purpose of the end-to-end thing was. So at that time, Dell had a consulting arm. Now, it's not a consulting arm they have. Dell has many consulting arms, but this was one at a particular time. They came and they went. And they brought us in a room, and they just said, well, let's just walk front to back. What do you do? And so we showed them what the process was. And the first thing we realized is that inadvertently, we were actually causing each other trouble. And so as people would explain what they had to do, they'd go, oh, I had no idea that I caused you to have to do that. I apologize. So that was the first thing, was awareness. But then what they asked us to do is they said, why don't we, so really what is goodness is that from the time somebody makes a request, we handle the request effectively, we package it up, we test it, we roll it out, and then it works, and it doesn't blow up desktops. And the thing that the customer asked it to do, which was, so why we had to package these things is there was lots of ways you could install it, but we had to install it with default, so it would like, you know, instead of somebody having like type in to configure it, it would automatically be built in. So success was we put stuff on desktops that did what it was supposed to do for the customer, and we didn't blow up desktops. So we formed a team. It was a process team that was now responsible for the end-to-end. And we said, what constitutes success? And we got together when we were improving. And we also became conscious of the fact that if I was going to go do something to my process that might have an up or downstream impact, I ought to ask my buddies up or downstream whether my quote, improvement was actually going to make their life any better. Because I could just inadvertently make their life worse. So I didn't want to make their life worse, but before I didn't know. I would just happily go about implementing my improvement and causing them a whole lot of trouble. So what happened was we got together on a regular basis, and it wasn't like every week, but we now became actually accountable for the whole. So we had an end-to-end process team. Now onto Agile transformations. Agile tends to, and it shouldn't, but it does, it tends to optimize part of the process. Right? So typically when you bring an Agile transformation into an organization, you don't say, so for me, agility is like, how do you get information into the company from your sales force and from your customers rapidly? How does that information move quickly across the company? But typically you start and you say, I want to do some development stuff. And we start optimizing there. We go, yo, y'all product owners, you got to get on board because this stuff is awesome and you're not paying attention to us. You better like do this stuff right because we're doing this Agile thing. And typically, what's happening there is that there's no overall portfolio management or value delivery KPI, so we don't actually know whether we're successful or not. And the process isn't owned. So what I'm suggesting is, even in your Agile transformation, instead of saying we're in the process of moving to Agile, you say we're continually in the process of improving how we deliver value. Getting better at Agile practices is a critical part of that ongoing improvement. So Agile is now part of something that you're doing. The goal is overall delivery of value. Agile can be helpful. And in some places, maybe Agile has nothing to say, and you may have to figure something else out to do. So the core ideas from this section, and we're just about done. Consider having end-to-end process ownership teams for key processes, like concept to cash. And these have to be comprised of practitioners who are somewhat visionary. So you can't have senior vice presidents, but you know, because senior vice presidents don't do those jobs. So you need people who can be like, or more like process aware. So like if you have some Six Sigma people in your organization, those would be like really good people to have be part of this process team. So I was in that organization where they did that. And then later on, I worked for another organization where they literally had process owners for all their major processes. It's a big cultural shift because the people who are in the vertical silos now have to defer certain decisions to the whole. And that's not easy for them to do because they've been used to being able to make decisions. But what happens is, so now back to the how does this start to bridge the difference between this IT management divide. IT isn't doing their optimizing loop, and the product lines aren't doing their optimizing loop irrespective of each other. You sit together and you say, are we getting what we want out of the system? And if we're not getting what we want out of the system, what could we do collectively to be able to improve the system? And you stop doing the local optimization, or you stop unconsciously doing local optimization. I don't mean developers shouldn't do better code reviews or something like that, and you have to like go check with the, you know, your product line manager to find that out, because that's not the stuff that cuts across the boundaries, but it's how do you actually pass stuff back and forth to each other. And then measure and improve the whole, not just the parts. So in companies where they ask, like, how do we measure our Agile transformation? I usually have this answer that they don't like very much, which is like, well, you probably ought to try to start and find out whether you're delivering more value. That's probably where you ought to start, as opposed to starting at a very low level. You know, start with the most significant digit as opposed to the least significant digit in the equation if you're trying to figure out whether you get goodness or not. So with a couple of minutes left, if you have any actions that you would like to take at the team level, at the organizational level, at whatever level, write them down. So just write down some stuff for you, because this meeting, like, life evaporates fast, right? This might be, for those of you who found it interesting, it'll be interesting. For those of you who thought it was, you know, boring, redundant, whatever. But whatever you think about it, tomorrow probably will disappear. So if you take a moment and write down a couple things about this, just what things you might want to try to do when you go back to your organization. And if you don't want to do anything, you don't have to. It's just an offer. I also want to acknowledge this organization. So I had the chance to go to a number of the deep Agile sessions that this group did years ago before I was like on the road all of the time. They were awesome. So as I was like starting to learn about Agile, this was an incredible resource, and I'm really thrilled that it's still around and is still an incredible resource.
Come to a conference.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, yeah, I mean, the people that you guys get are awesome. They really.
There's the Agile Games conference coming up in April. It's
Yep.
a good thing. You should do it.
So the final thing is, if any of you have questions about this or just want to chat about what came up tonight, and you're interested in contacting me, there's my contact information, and I would love to continue this discussion with folks. So is there anything you do now? Okay, so John has to do stuff. So I can say thank you very much, but you don't get to go. John has to do stuff.